Yeah, so this performance art that I did was part of this exhibition called Cinders and Sympathies. And it was very much about my identity, about my lived experience. Okay, all good. Let's make sure we've got, hold on, I just have to do something on my phone, on my other phone. Hold up. Okay, there we go. Okay, perfect. Yeah, this is a 5 minutes in, far out. Yeah, this piece of performance art was basically, you may have seen the title of this is The Paper Skirt or Paper Skirts. Can't remember exactly what I called it. And I'll just describe it. So the exhibition had all these different, some of them were like pieces that went straight on the wall, like in frames. And then others of them are what's called installation art. And installation art is where you use space and you use objects to create an experience, right? And um, I had a projection that was in one part of the gallery. I had a whole series of sculptures is a good way to put them. If like basically if I went into explaining what installation art is, that might be a bit complex, and get into a whole bunch of like art theory stuff. But it's essentially like creating an experience is what an installation is. And then I did a performance art on the opening night. Yeah. And the performance art that I did was I got a plinth, which is basically like a plinth is the boxes that are in the art gallery that you see their work sitting on top of. So they might be a plinth with like a sculpture, um, a piece of fine china, a piece of a bust, which is like a head with like the shoulders. It's hard to imagine because I know some people seeing this actually have probably never been to an actual art gallery. So it's interesting even just thinking about that and where we're at as a collective, right? And so on the opening night, it was really crowded at First Draft Gallery, if you missed it. First Draft Gallery in Sydney, which is really, really close to, it's probably like a 15 minutes from the Opera House. If you're from another country, maybe that'll help you understand where it is. Or the Harbour Bridge, the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And so the whole exhibition was about the way that Aboriginal identity is viewed. So I'm an Aboriginal person, an Indigenous person of so-called Australia. And some of the sculptures were very directly about colonizers, and some of them were about the way that Blackness is seen and the way that Black artists specifically are seen. And part of the inspiration that I got for this exhibition, Cinders and Sympathies, which was a solo exhibition, was that I was born in a city, right? And the idea and the concept of Aboriginal art is dot painting. So you've probably seen it's like dots and this very traditional, ancient form of Aboriginal art. And ironically, it's like people get very stuck into this idea of Aboriginal art being dot painting or something that looks like it was done like 200, 300 years ago. And of course, creates a very complex situation when you are somebody who wasn't born 200 years ago, well, that's a whole other story, but I was born in a city and raised by parents who, have very clearly have the effects of the stolen generation as is riddled through many Aboriginal Indigenous families. So we were contemporary urban Aboriginal people. Yeah. My first mentor, my first inspiration in art was my uncle, Uncle Michael Riley. And he was part of a gallery called Bumali, which was the first ever urban Aboriginal gallery that ever existed in this entire country. And part of that is because in this country, in so-called Australia, people really want to hold on to the concept and the idea that Aboriginal people are savages, which is kind of complex when you have like a whole bunch of other Black people in the world using the term savage in their raps or in their colloquial language, or referring to themselves as savages, without really thinking about the way that is actually connected to colonization and the way that we've ended up where we've ended up. The vast gaps in pay, in health, the terrible problems with domestic violence, with drug, alcohol, self-harm, all of these things that are so much more increased in Indigenous, Black, brown, and immigrant/migrant communities. So yeah, so one day I was working at Bumali, and this is many years after, sadly, my uncle left this realm. And I was working there, and I was just like helping out for a day or two. Or maybe just one exhibition. I wasn't like a permanent staff member or anything there. And this white woman came into the gallery, and looking back now, I can see she wanted some cheap Aboriginal art to like sell again, or to put in her hotel, or I don't know, to try and get some really cheap Aboriginal art. And she came in and she looked at everything on the wall, and obviously it wasn't cheap enough or whatever, or it wasn't. I think she came in thinking it was an Aboriginal, like that she would see a stereotyped idea of what Aboriginal art is, which is, and this is in no way disregarding the traditional forms of Aboriginal art that are so vital and so important, and I have so much respect for. But this woman, this Caucasian woman, she looked around and she was visibly annoyed that it wasn't dot painting, that a lot of the artwork there, even though there was a few elements of dot art, which by the way is actually not, most tribes in so-called Australia don't actually traditionally do that. My tribe actually has a very different form, but not as recognized, not as well known. And I don't know what that was. Maybe an Aboriginal spirit that's here, right? And so she was visibly annoyed. I don't know, she could also be looking for like a souvenir or something, because there's lots of people that rip off Aboriginal art and sell it as souvenirs. And she was annoyed that, you could tell she was annoyed that there wasn't this like stereotypical, what she expected to see of Aboriginal art. Anyway, so then she saw me at the desk, right? And obviously I'm Aboriginal, duh, and especially in that context. And so she demanded to see my artwork, because she asked if I was an artist. And I was like, yeah, I'm an artist. Yeah, I'm an Aboriginal artist. And so I showed her my work. And I think I had some, what did I have? I think it was some photographs and portraits that I did of this Aboriginal friend of mine who, anyways, she looked at it and she said, I thought you were Aboriginal. I thought you said you were an Aboriginal artist. And I was like, I am an Aboriginal artist. I'm an Aboriginal person and I made this art. So therefore, it's Aboriginal art. And she insulted me. I won't go into any more details, but she insulted me and basically insinuated that my work was not Aboriginal because it wasn't painting that was looked at like it was done by an elder sitting out in the desert or somebody who lived hundreds of years ago. So this all went into the inspiration and the thinking of the exhibition the solo exhibition that I did at First Draft. And so the performance art that I'm going to tell you about, thank you for your patience. Is this lighting okay? Isn't lighting funny? Is it the lighting or is it the camera? We don't know, right? I mean, I do know, but I won't go into it because I've got more important things to focus on right now. Oh, maybe I could. Oh, I better not get distracted. Hold up. Hold up. Hey, I don't know how to say hold up. So I got a plinth and I put it in the center of the gallery. Such an artist. So I. Oh, is that too dark? Is that good? Oh, that's kind of nice. Yeah, that works. Does something different to the focus though, doesn't it? I love photography as well. Maybe I should talk about that sometime. Yeah, so I got this plinth and I put it in the center of the gallery. Shout outs to anyone that was there at that opening. And I made this skirt made out of newspapers and I folded it like, you know how I don't know if you ever did this, but you can take a piece of paper and you can fold it and it like concertinas into a fan. You can make it like a fan. And I basically made a gigantic version of that made out of newspapers and turned it into a skirt, right? This beautiful skirt. And I wore a really messy long wig, like weave, with like really luscious, thick, curly Aboriginal hair, but it was more wavy because it's like funny. A lot of people who have there's so many concepts around hair linked to race and identity, right? And I had some tiny, maybe even like this, like a little white top on, maybe a little singlet top or something. And this big, actually, I think I did make like a little bodice, actually. I made like a little sweetheart bodice. Is that how you say it? Like a sweetheart neckline out of the paper. And then this big skirt that was made all out of like basically like a giant fan, a paper skirt. And then I had a plinth sitting next to me, like maybe 2 meters away from me, up against the wall. And I had a poster that I created that said, no, first I was saying, then I bought like a whole bunch of hole punches, like, the hole punches that you use in offices or whatever, that punch holes into paper. And so, when you use a hole puncher, how it creates holes in the paper and then you're left with like little circles or little dots, right? So I bought a whole bunch of hole punches and sat them on the table. And then I had my Coolerman. And the Coolerman is a traditional sacred thing that young girls get given when they become women, or as you're doing when you do initiation processes. And it's carved out of the bark of a tree, and you can collect berries, you can collect fruit, you can collect nuts and put them inside of it, or you can also put a baby in it. You might have seen it in artworks, or if any of you have seen like photographs of Aboriginal people, it's like a long wooden curved bowl, basically. You can also put a baby in it and rock it like that between your legs or whatever, or between your hands, or you can also collect water in it. Obviously, that's probably one of the most important things. Make sure you stay hydrated, everyone. And I had the Coolerman sitting in the middle of the little table, the plinth. And I had all the hole punches sitting on either side of it. And then I created this poster, and the poster said, please help this poor inner city Aborigine artist by donating dots to help her get validation. I'm paraphrasing here, but help her get validation as an Aboriginal artist. And so what I was doing in that performance art is I was making a comment about the idea of Aboriginal art only being this one very stereotypical idea of what Aboriginal art is, because my actual career has been so directly affected by people's outdated ideas and concepts of what a Black person is, about what an Indigenous person is, and what an Aboriginal artist is. And so then, yeah, what I did was I invited the audience, and there must have been about at least 200 people at the opening, maybe even more. And I invited them to pick up the hole punches and punch holes into my paper skirt made out of a local newspaper. Everything I do is very multi-layered, especially as an artist. And so they would take the hole punches, and I got them to line up. Oh, and I was holding a rose. That's the other thing. I was holding this big red rose. And I was dressed, other than that, it was just the newspaper and maybe, yeah, and then the weave and no shoes, right? And I was just sitting on top of the plinth like I was an object, like I was a piece of the art, right? Like I was a piece of art, yeah? Which was also a comment about being not only an Aboriginal artist, but a woman, and the objectification and the dehumanization that Indigenous people suffer through, as well as Black people, as well as to many degrees, and for many of us, women. And then they would line up and they would get to punch holes into my paper dress. And there was like a little capture thing underneath it. And then they would take the little paper circles, the dots, and they would put it inside the Coolerman under the poster that said, please donate dots to help this poor inner city Aborigine get validation as an Aboriginal artist. But I was really also talking about not only getting validation as an artist, but validation as an Aboriginal person. Because like just an artist can make a quote unquote just an artist, someone who's considered to just be a white person who makes art. They can make art about anything, like literally sell photos of like Indian or Thai kids that they've like when photographed on holiday, and then they can go and exhibit that, and that's considered their artwork. But as an Aboriginal artist, I was always expected to make very specific artwork. And it was just this whole bunch of identity politics pushed upon me. And then as they would come and they would punch the holes, I wouldn't say anything when they first came up. They start punching the holes, and some of them knew me, a lot of them didn't know me, some of them had seen my work advertised but hadn't actually experienced my artwork. And then I would, as they punched the holes, and I was holding this rose, this one stem of rose, which was the comment about this other racist experience I had working in a florist, the only time I've ever worked in a fucking corporation type vibe job. And as they punched the holes, at first a lot of them thought it was a joke. They thought it was funny. And then I would look up at them and I would go, thank you, ma'am. Bless you. Thank you, sir. Bless you. And some of them, you just saw, they suddenly realized the part they were playing. They just suddenly realized with a chill what I was actually doing, and the everything that they had missed when they picked up those hole punchers and came over and started punching holes in my skirt. And of course, as they were punching the holes in my skirt, in my paper skirt, my brown skin was starting to show more and more through the paper skirt. So the more people, the more strangers came and punched holes in my paper skirt to create these dots to donate to me so that I could be seen as an Aboriginal artist, an acceptable Aboriginal artist. The flesh, the brown flesh, would show through these little holes being punched all over me, all over my thighs on this paper skirt, newspaper paper skirt. And that was also a comment, a very big comment about people feeling so good about themselves because they are, quote unquote, helping an Aboriginal person or helping a Black person. And that the only way we're meant to get money is by putting our hand out and or receiving some kind of handout, like we are lesser, like we don't deserve to get exhibitions as much, like we don't deserve to get funding as much. And it's interesting because there's a whole bunch of separate funding within the within the art world that is specifically for Aboriginal people. And often that funding is actually linked to things like mining companies that are actually destroying Aboriginal land, or casinos, or fucked up corporations that are actually really bigoted and racist. It was also a comment about colonization and the way that the missionaries that came here not only stole the children and put them on missions, and killed and murdered many parents, many family members, but they intentionally took the children and put them in different locations and changed their names so they wouldn't know who their parents were. They would make it illegal, like for us to speak our own language. And if in those missions, if we spoke our own language, we would get beaten and we would get abused. And we were forced to take on their religion, right? We were forced to go into their churches and do their Sunday school and to call ourselves names that were from the Bible. And so me saying, "Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Bless you," as they were punching holes into my paper skirt, showing my vulnerable brown thighs, putting dots into my traditional coolerman that before colonization I would have used to collect water in fresh, healthy rivers, that I would have used to care for a baby, that I would have used that would grow up healthy, right? In a safe place before colonization happened. I used it to pick fruit and berries, traditional, that I learned from my elders and from my tribe, not from a book or from a white person who thinks they're smarter than me. And it was really a powerful work. And I remember a few brown people were there. The only people who refused to do it and could see what I was saying, could see what I was doing, and didn't feel comfortable punching those holes into my paper skirt, they were brown folks, right? They were Indigenous people. One was this very gorgeous ex of mine, actually, come to think of it, which is interesting in itself. Where were they from? Maybe Colombia. Or were they Brazilian? A brown lesbian friend of mine with African heritage. She thought it was a joke. She thought it was hilarious until I said, "Bless you, thank you," and didn't break character for a second. She worked for a charity, some kind of charity that helps Aboriginal people. So yeah, I just felt really drawn to share that right now, which is interesting. You never know what the ancestors want you to speak on, but art is very healing. And I never, um, I sold a lot of work in that exhibition, but I never realized how much I may have actually offended and rocked the boat in the art world by openly critiquing it within the exhibition. An exhibition at a gallery that's extremely well funded, mind you. Oh, is the focus on there? Oh, damn it. Damn it. It must be the lighting. I always found doing performance art was a very powerful way to communicate and convey things, because it wasn't the same as being able to, for example, if I did a self-portrait or took a photograph of myself or of anyone and put it on the wall, you could look at it on the wall and you could have this space between you. You know, you could have this distance, which is kind of like the fourth wall, which I learned about and I knew about because I'd done some theatre work before. And the fourth wall, the idea of the fourth wall is if you look at a stage, if you look at a stage, then like in a theatre or something, there's the back wall, there's the curtains on either side, and then there's a wall, an imaginary wall, that sits between the audience and the performer, between what's happening on the stage, the world that you're creating on the stage, and the audience who's viewing it. And so you imagine this fourth wall, which meant that you were, it's like the fourth wall is this piece of glass, you could almost imagine, that the audience is watching. And then some plays would intentionally break the fourth wall, which when you would actually interact directly with the audience. Like, for example, I think you could think about like if you went to a comedy show and they would like call you out, or a magician show or something like that, magic show, that they would call you out in the audience. Or you might be performing and then somebody would go stand in the audience and do something else. And people who so doing performance art was just doing performance art, I just felt like I used to love the way it disrupted that process of somebody just objectively looking at something. And that's the same as when I would be on stage or doing any kind of theatre work, that people could just watch you. And I always wanted to disrupt that when I was making work and that was talking about important issues that are about people, particularly about human rights, about the dehumanizing of people, the objectification of people, I just had a knack for it, I guess. I also just had a knack for it because ever since I was really little, I just can feel, and also because I grew up in a house of protest, in a house that when I was very young, both of my parents were both human rights activists. And many people in my family. And we were really connected to some very important moments throughout history in so-called Australia. And so I learned very early what people's perception of Black people is. And I'm talking specifically from my experience in Australia. which people don't realize is possibly the most secretly, insidiously racist place in the fucking world. A lot of people haven't realized that. And so then when I found art, when I discovered art and realized that I always said I wanted to be an artist from a very young age. I loved art. Like, I just always loved art. And I knew I would be an artist my whole life. I said, I'm going to be an artist. I am an artist. Which is funny when you think about it, because it's like I was an artist when I was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. When do you suddenly become an artist? It's like, when do you become a sage? When do you become an oracle? There's something about that. And so it was very heartbreaking when I really started making work and selling artwork as an Aboriginal artist, or even that I was getting boxed into and caged into this idea of my artwork having to be Aboriginal. And even if I would try and present things anonymously, people would go out of their way to make sure that either the gallery, the audience, or they were like, oh no, you're an Aboriginal artist, you're not just an artist. And that was also the case when I was making music a lot. You know, people used to book me as the first to perform so that they wouldn't have to pay for someone to do an acknowledgement of country or a welcome to country if I was on my own tribal land. And looking back, it's like, that is so gross. And it's such a, like, it really affected my music career, because then it was like I was, so it's very heartbreaking to realize that the bigotry and the racism that I already survived every day of my life, that was very present in the art world and incredibly present in the music scene of Australia. I'm sure it is everywhere. Very disheartening, very sad to see. And so I was like, all right, let me make some work about this. All right. And people used to cry after seeing me perform. And so looking back, I'm like, I understand now that I was using a lot of other gifts beyond music and beyond art. But yeah, the paper skirt. Nobody ever really came and spoke to me about that work that much. After a few people did on the night. And it's fascinating because then the people that had come and punched the holes into my paper skirt, they had this, you could see they had this feeling, this experience of it. And then they would watch other people line up to keep punching the holes. And as they were doing it, my coolerman was getting more and more filled with these little paper dots as a statement. And then at the end of the opening night, I took off that paper skirt and I strung it up on the wall on a piece of rope, which was a comment about the horrendous rates of self-harm that happen in Indigenous communities across the world. And I hope that hasn't triggered anybody, and if you are experiencing that, please try and talk to somebody you trust and love, or get help, or know that I love you and care about you, and nobody deserves to leave this realm like that. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure the gallery didn't expect me to do it, like didn't expect that work. And even after they said it was one of the best shows they'd had in that gallery, I can see now the way that it ruffled some feathers, because I was critiquing the art world from within it. And I was making a very I was making a very strong statement about an expression about the actual lived experience of an Aboriginal person in that art world. Yeah, that was a good exhibition. Okay, well, I'm gonna go finish watching the rest of my movie. Oh, look at that, 40 minutes, roughly. If you have any desire to create or you have any interest in creating, I highly encourage you to. Art is such an incredible way to process your feelings. It's such an amazing way to express things. It's such a beautiful way to communicate things to the world, and it's such a teacher. It is such a highly sophisticated, like powerful teacher and educator, not just for the viewer and for the person who's receiving and experiencing the art world, but for the artists themselves and for the galleries and for the whole world. In my artwork, I have always used the stereotypes that people had about me and have about people like me, to take that and I would transmute it and use it and flip it back around and show it back to them, to be like, check yourself about the perceptions that you have and the assumptions that you have, and maybe even the hidden bigotry and hidden racism within. Like, how amazing that art can do that, but particularly performance art, because in performance art, you are not just looking at something on a wall, you're not just observing an object, you are interacting with a human being. That's why performance art is so incredible and so radical and kind of punk, you know, like really, yeah, I love performance art. It's also very empowering, particularly for somebody born into the body of an AFAB, assigned female at birth person, you know, or a woman as I am. Yeah. To be like, oh no, your assumptions and your projections about my body and about who I am, they're not mine, they're yours. But let me make some really dope art and show it to you so that you can go home and think about it. I wonder if I'll do an exhibition anytime soon. I can't wait till the world is like, I think I'll leave it there. Thanks. Yeah, sending lots of love and strength and resilience. God, that was a good performance. But it's interesting because performance art isn't just performance. Performance art is something very, it's like, it's much more than a performance. And so is standing up for human rights.